All right. The 2024 Halloween season is in full effect. I did get a little bit festive. We were talking about Universal Monsters today, so that's up with all the theming here. Did I play the TV? I wanted to have like some spooky things playing on the TV while I talk, just for a little bit of visual background noise. So the point of this video is I wanted to do kind of like an in-depth retrospective of all of the Universal Monster films basically ever made. Like, this will be a very brief kind of glossing over. I'll highlight the important ones and talk a little bit more about them, but mainly this is just kind of a quick retrospective. I went down like a whole list of every film made by Universal and just kind of tried to collect everything that qualifies. So real quick, let's get into my qualifications. So one, we are only covering 9 specific franchises. Dracula, Frankenstein, that also includes The Bride of Frankenstein, it's the same franchise. The Wolfman, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Phantom of the Opera, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Invisible Man, where are we at? 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh yeah, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I almost didn't count, but I will for reasons that I'll get into later. So that's qualification number 1. They must fit into one of those franchises. So we're not talking about Psycho, Jaws, anything like that. There's kind of a cutoff date for what counts. Universal Monsters refers to a specific era. And even then, there's other stuff from that era that we're just not going to talk about, like the Black Cat, the Mole People. We're not getting into that. That doesn't count. My second qualification is that they must be produced by Universal. It can't just be like Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola movie. That doesn't count. Anything made by Hammer Studios, that doesn't count. Okay, now that we got the basic qualifications out of the way, I think we can start getting into the list.
So our journey starts in 1913 with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, starring King Baggett. So yeah, like I said earlier, I was not initially going to include Jekyll and Hyde because typically he's not considered part of the main Universal Monster canon. Like, if you look at like the video releases, like the Universal Monsters Classic Collection, or just any like sets released by Universal, there's never a Jekyll and Hyde movie included on them. And then you look at a lot of like merchandise, like action figures and plush toys, and there's even more variety in the merchandise. You'll get the Phantom and the Hunchback, which are like the silent movie characters, which typically aren't included in the video releases because they're public domain or something stupid like that. But yeah, you will not see a Jekyll and Hyde. The only time I've ever seen Jekyll and Hyde merch with the official Universal logo on it was in the Diamond Select line of action figures. They did the one from the Abbott and Costello crossover, which I will get to later. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But yeah, it's just kind of generally common belief that Universal did not do a straightforward adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's had cameos in other things. He was in Van Helsing briefly, and even after that he was in The Mummy with Tom Cruise, which I have a lot to say about that movie, but I digress. He's kind of just like by association of being a classic horror icon from literature and, has been in classic movies. He just kind of fits in, like, even if Universal didn't actually do a straightforward adaptation. Yes, there's the 1931 Jekyll and Hyde with Frederick March, which I think is considered the main classic Jekyll and Hyde movie, but Universal didn't make that. So it's just commonly believed that Universal did not do a Jekyll and Hyde movie. Except they fucking did, in 1913. It was only about, like, maybe 20 minutes long or so. So it wasn't what we would consider a feature exactly. But this was made in a time when movies weren't typically that long. Pre-1920s. So, yeah. It's a very average, kind of bland adaptation. Not a lot of noteworthy things. Again, 1913, movies were very simple back then. They were more like stage plays, just kind of like you set the camera down, you get a static shot, You let the actors play out the whole scene, and then you cut when you're ready to move the camera to the next set, basically. Not a lot of fancy pants cinematography going on here. The only notable thing, really, is when Dr. Jekyll transforms into Mr. Hyde. It is just delightfully over the top. He's like crouched down like a little ghoul. The makeup's nothing too fancy, but he really makes up for it with his over-the-top performance. Speaking of makeup, King Baggot, I think I'm saying that right, did his own makeup. Apparently that was common back then. You didn't get a makeup guy to do the actor's makeup. The actors just kind of had to do their own makeup, I guess. And we'll get into the great Lon Chaney in a minute here, but let me just say, King Baggot and his grease paint mug, he is no Lon Chaney. Next on our list, from 1923, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, starring Lon Chaney, has the disfigured Quasimodo. While he is considered to be a universal monster character, I do feel it's important to mention that this character is in no way an actual monster. This is definitely monster being used in a very loose sense. He's kind of like the only kind-hearted character from the novel he's from. The movie definitely changed things to make some of the other characters a little nicer, but this is still a world of, just dark, gritty, gothic atmosphere. Medieval times when people were just, I don't know, shitty. But yeah, Quasimodo is a pretty sympathetic character. He is not the monster. This is considered a universal monster film, but really it's more of a gothic drama. With that said, it's still an incredible movie, and there's that name again, Lon Chaney. Now we can get into him and his amazing makeup job. So just like our friend King Baggot, Lon Chaney did do his own makeup, but unlike King Baggot, Lon Chaney just knocked it out of the park. Amazing makeup, especially for the 1920s. He devised all kinds of crazy ways to turn himself into these fantastical characters. And in the case of Quasimodo, he had this I believe it was a giant rubber piece or something, I'm not really sure, that he had a strap to his back with a belt or something to create the hunch. I don't even know what he did to do most of it. I mean, a lot of his tips and tricks aren't widely discussed. I hear more about how he did the Phantom of the Opera or the Vampire from London After Midnight than I do about Quasimodo, but regardless of the techniques used, he got results. It just looks incredible. Not a lot else to say here right now because I do kind of want to keep this going. This is just supposed to be a brief retrospective, and I feel like I talked a million years about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a fucking 20-minute long silent film that nobody cares about. So let's skip ahead to The Phantom of the Opera in 1925. Once again, we have Lon Chaney playing the titular character, Eric the Opera Ghost. Born with disfigurement, again outcast from society, making him another tragic character like Quasimodo. But unlike Quasimodo, the Phantom truly is a monster. He is a murderer, he's a stalker, complete psychopath. I feel like he really laid a lot of the groundwork for later slasher characters. I mean, we have a disfigured madman wearing a mask, causing total chaos. There's a lot of similarities to Jason Voorhees, who is also a very tragic character. Lon Chaney, once again, did some amazing work on the makeup, doing all kinds of having wires to hold his nose back to give that skeletal look. I believe he even devised a waterproof makeup for one point where he had to go underwater. And apart from the makeup, his just mannerisms are just so iconic. Just the way he moves his fingers and crosses his arms and expresses his face even with all that makeup on. 5 out of 5. I mean, I love this movie. Without wasting too much more time, let's get into the 1930s. This officially brings us into the talkie era. And if you don't know what a talkie is, that is any movie with sound. So not a silent film. We just call those movies nowadays, though, I guess. So 1931, we have Dracula, based on the Bram Stoker novel. Or more so based on the play, which was written by... Hold on. Hamilton Dean. I had to walk over to my bookshelf because I actually have the script to the play on my bookshelf. Haven't read it, though. I just thought it was neat. I feel like most of us are familiar with Dracula, the iconic vampire, just this ancient creature living in this Transylvanian castle, basically killed off most of the locals. Blood supply is running a little low, so he's planning to move to England in a place called Carfax Abbey. I could sit here and explain the entire story to Dracula, but again, this is a very iconic story. I feel like this is the most adapted out of all of these. I probably should have gone into more detail about the other things that I've talked about already, but also I have a lot of movies to talk about. Jesus Christ, there's so many movies. We're going to be here all day. So yeah, that's kind of why we're kind of zooming past these. This is one of my favorite movies to watch around Halloween time specifically. A lot of Halloween seasons in the past, I've just sort of kick-started with this one. It's kind of like Christmas. You got to watch the Rankin Bass movies. For Halloween, it's these classic Universal films, and Dracula is usually one of the main ones that I got to pop on. I just hearing that Swan Lake theme in the opening, against that artwork of the bat. Oh my God, I just love it. Especially that part where the audio screws up a little bit and it gets really high pitched. Bela Lugosi plays Dracula and he gives an amazing performance. He's just like, he is the iconic Dracula. When you do an imitation of Dracula, you may not know it, but you're imitating Bela Lugosi. I'm trying to do his accent right now, but I'm not doing great. Hold on, let me try reading this bag of peanuts. I need more to say than just his name. Planters heat nuts, 13 grams of protein per serving. I think you get the idea. Yeah, he's just really kind of like creepy and spooky in this. And then we have Dwight Fry playing his mad assistant Renfield, and he gives it debatably an even better performance. Love that little weird little laugh that he does. And also from 1931, there is the Spanish version of Dracula. I'll talk about these together, I guess. It's kind of the same movie, but not really. Back before they did dubbing or subtitles, they would just shoot an entirely different movie with a different language speaking cast. So I think it was during the day they'd have the English-speaking cast do their shit, and then at night the Spanish cast would come in, working with the same script, same director, even though I think the director Todd Browning I think he struggled a bit with the Spanish cast because I don't think he spoke Spanish. I think I heard that he had to take the back seat a little bit. Some people debate the Spanish version is better. There's definitely some more interesting cinematography, but there's a debate depending on what you consider to be better. I mean, the Lugosi version has Bela Lugosi, who is just the perfect Dracula. So the Spanish version doesn't have that. They also don't have Dwight Fry, who I think is the better Renfield. But again, they're a little bit more theatrical with the Spanish version. So you get some more elaborate shots. I know there's a shot Dracula's coming out of his coffin. There's lots of fog and lighting. It's very theatrical. Where the Lugosi version, I think, did things a little more subtly and it was a little more creepy. But then the Spanish version was allowed to have rats crawling around the castle, whereas the English version had the substitute with possums. Rats were too dirty, I guess, so they used possums, which are infamously known for how clean and not disgusting they are. Next, we're moving on to the 1931 Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff as the monster, and Colin Clive as Dr. Frankenstein. Just like Dracula, this is based off of a novel. In this case, it's written by Mary Shelley, but also, just kidding, it's not based on the novel. It's based on a stage play that is based on the novel. Are you following this? Good. So it's a very loose adaptation of the book, if you're viewing it as a book adaptation. But it gets the basic elements right. Dr. Frankenstein is a young scientist who wants to create life. So in this version, he goes grave digging with his assistant, Fritz, not Igor. A lot of people think the Hunchback assistant is Igor. Nope, that's a different character who we'll talk about later. The Hunchback assistant is Fritz. Once again, played by Dwight Fry from Dracula. And he's great in this, just a weird, kind of creepy little guy. So anyway, him and Dr. Frankenstein are collecting body parts from the graveyard and from the gallows and using these to create a new, basically just this perfect creature. We're going to put quotation marks on perfect because there are some issues. Fritz is given the job of stealing a brain from a medical school. He's supposed to get a specific brain that's supposed to be really good. but he drops the brain and it breaks. Damn it. So he grabs another brain just quickly and then gets the hell out of there. That brain being a abnormal brain that had some sort of defect in it. Now, this could have been worked around if it wasn't for Fritz immediately like waving fire in the monster's face. So there's lots of conflict. Things get carried away. Monster goes on a rampage. I mean, it's Frankenstein. I think you know the story. I'm already talking about this way longer than I intended to, which is great because I'm just gonna... Yeah, okay. I'll just try and get into some of the highlights here. Boris Karloff, without having any dialogue, does a great performance. Just his body language is so creepy when it needs to be, but also sympathetic when it needs to be. Amazing scenery and atmosphere with the graveyards and the castle. There's just various great performances. Again, Dwight Frye, I kind of love his just quirky little character. It's all good. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. And it gets even better in the sequel, which we'll get to later. The Mummy from 1932. So at this point, Boris Karloff is a bit of a big star, I guess, from the success of Frankenstein. This was the first time, I believe, that he was allowed to speak on camera. He was actually given lines and really showed that he has potential to do some good line delivery. The story is basically revolving around this ancient mummy that comes back to life after somebody reads this scroll that, brings him to life. We've all been there. It happens. And once he is brought back to life, there's a bit of a time gap, and he goes from, being this rotted corpse-like mummy to looking like he is kind of regenerated, perhaps. In the remake from the 90s, it is definitely he's regenerating by sucking the life out of other people. In this version, it's a little bit vague on how he goes from a mummy to looking normal. There's a big time gap, so I think it skips ahead 10 or so years. So maybe he just kind of healed. That's why he was gone so long. He had to grow back his flesh. I also theorized that maybe he is still just a mummy and he has some, quickly pasted on makeup to hide that he's a corpse, which might explain this one part where he gets really petty when this guy tries to touch him.
Your pardon, I dislike to be touched. An Eastern prejudice.
Which I just love that line so much. It just makes him seem like just such a petty little diva, but I love it. And I was very happy upon rewatching the 99 remake, and they actually re-included that line.
Prince Imhotep does not like to be touched. A silly Eastern superstition, I'm afraid.
Good stuff. That movie was made by somebody that did their homework. But yeah, I figured maybe he doesn't want to be touched because he's actually a corpse underneath his clothing. And he doesn't want anybody to find that out. Just a theory. But anyway, in this film, the mummy is trying to resurrect his past lover. In ancient Egypt times, he tried to resurrect her and got caught in the act, which led to him being mummified alive. It happens, And then, like I said, he comes back to life. There's this great sequence when he comes to life where this guy sees the mummy. They show the actual corpse mummy very minimally. It's mostly kind of left to your imagination. But this character sees the mummy and he just loses his mind immediately. And I'm like, you know what? That's probably what would happen if you saw a corpse just get up and walk. You would probably just immediately go insane. Your brain would not be able to comprehend that. And then the mummy goes on to find the reincarnated version of his lover, and he's trying to kind of resurrect her through her body. It's a very interesting thing. This whole storyline of the monster trying to resurrect his past lover through a reincarnated version of her. It's been copied in a lot of Dracula adaptations, but just want to make it perfectly clear right here and now. It's an original idea from The Mummy. The Mummy is also, I believe, the first movie on this list that's not based on a book. All the other ones are based on books so far. This one is an original screenplay. There were some books that I have not read, books or short stories, I forget which, that were used as loose inspiration, and I'll have to check those out at some point to see how much of those made it into the movie, but basically, this is an original script. Imhotep is an original character from the Universal Monster canon. What an icon. Up next from 1933, we have The Invisible Man, played by Claude Rains, who is an actor that just has a phenomenal voice. And for a monster character that you do not see, through most of the film, you really want to get an actor with a strong voice. They nailed that here. Boris Karloff was originally supposed to be the Invisible Man, because, you know, he's like Frankenstein and the Mummy. He was kind of like their big monster guy at the time, but I think there was like a scheduling conflict or something, so they got Claude Rains instead. And I'm very thankful for that, because I'm sure Karloff would have done a good job, but Rains is so good as the Invisible Man. He is just this manic, psychotic nut job.
Get out of here! Look here, is this my house or yours? What are you doing, help?
Like, I want to make it perfectly clear. It's not just about any guy who turns himself invisible. Jack Griffin, the character in this film, is just perfect. The basic gist is that Jack Griffin creates this serum that he injects into himself, which turns him invisible. The tragic side effect here is that it also causes him to gradually lose his sanity. And to make things even worse, he is struggling to find a cure to turn himself visible again. He ends up going insane and has the power of invisibility. So that's not a great combo. Basically goes on a rampage, causing all kinds of chaos. It's very Joker-like, the way the character is. Just psychotic lunatic, can be calm one minute, lose it the next. Wonderful movie. I'd love to talk about it for 3 more hours, like all of these, but let's move on to the next film. From 1935, we have our first sequel on the list, The Bride of Frankenstein. This movie basically just outdoes the first film in every way. And that's saying a lot, because the first film is great. I love the first film. But this is one of those cases where the sequel is so much better, you know. Again, it's subjective, but it's like, you know, Terminator 2, Aliens, The Dark Knight. You know, a lot of people will debate that those are all sequels better than the original. Again, it's all subjective, but The Bride of Frankenstein is a classic case of this. You have the Frankenstein monster comes back. He's causing more havoc than in the first movie, but he's also developed a lot more as a character. He learns to speak. He has some very sentimental moments where he befriends this blind man. Very, very heart-wrenching stuff happens, and then it leads to him finding Dr. Frankenstein and demanding that he builds him a mate. This is straight out of the Mary Shelley novel, too. He demands that Dr. Frankenstein builds him a companion like him, another monster, basically. And reluctantly, the doctor starts to go forward with this. In the book, he destroys his female creation before bringing it to life. In the movie, she's brought to life, and we get just another wonderful creature performance from Elsa Lanchester, who plays the Bride of Frankenstein. Funnily enough, they call her the Bride of Frankenstein. One, Frankenstein is referring to the doctor, not the monster, which is a nitpick, really. But 2, I didn't see any formal ceremony. I didn't see, like nobody there has their marriage license. I just don't think this whole thing's legitimate. I'm sorry. But in the film, the Bride of Frankenstein is, you know, again, body parts that are gathered and put together, but also her brain is grown in a jar. This is a contribution from Dr. Pretorius, who is Dr. Frankenstein is a misguided scientist. Dr. Pretorius is a legit mad scientist who teamed up with Dr. Frankenstein with the intention of creating another creature. And Dr. Pretorius, there's like this whole scene where he's showing his attempts at creating life, where he creates these little tiny people that he has in jars. And he basically says his issue is full size, which Dr. Frankenstein has mastered with his experiments. So I guess the agreement is he'll grow a brain in a jar, and then Dr. Frankenstein will take care of the body. Very interesting concept. So basically the bride has kind of like an infant brain, or really more animalistic. The way she looks around, almost like a cat or something. And then she even has like a hiss at one point when she feels threatened, which I heard is based off of a goose's hiss, which is interesting. I didn't even know gooses hissed until recently. Definitely a hard recommend. This is like one where if you've never watched like a lot of like black and white movies, but you're curious to get interested, maybe you want a good gateway movie to kind of like ease into it, because, you know, it can be hard if you don't watch classic movies generally. The pacing's different. Things are just different from like a modern Hollywood movie. I would recommend that this is a good one to start with, specifically for the horror genre. It has a decent pace, decent amount of action, good characters, good drama. There's a lot of artistic cinematography. So yeah, if you're wanting to like maybe get into the Universal monsters, definitely start with this one. If you're worried you're missing anything from the first Frankenstein, I mean, I guess you could watch that first if you really want to, but it will recap you. There's a little recap at the beginning of the film. After that, in 1936, we're continuing this trend of female versions of the monsters. We have Dracula's Daughter. So this is yet again another sequel, picking right where Dracula left off. Dracula does not come back to life. It is implied that he is dead for good. I believe they even burn his corpse in the beginning. So this is basically Dracula's daughter kind of learning that her father has passed, and she thinks that this means that, from what I remember, because I don't watch this one as often, I should rewatch it soon, I guess, but she kind of feels like, now that Dracula's dead, she will no longer have to live as a creature of the night. But that turns out to not be the case. And it's not long before she goes right back to drinking the blood of young ladies. And this one's interesting because when I first watched it, I was picking up some lesbian-like vibes. The same thing could be said for the 31 Dracula. There's a scene that feels a little gay, but there's definitely some lesbian vibes I was picking up when I first watched this movie, and that was like when I was a little kid, but it was like very in the back of my head. I wasn't thinking, I figured they didn't mean it like that. Back in the 30s, they didn't think about stuff like that. Then I found out they totally did. Shockingly, growing up in a small town, you just assume gay stuff didn't exist until more recently when it was invented. Points deducted for little kid me being fucking stupid, I guess. But as I learned more about the movie and kind of behind the scenes, it seems like the gay vibes were a little bit more deliberate. So if you're into that sort of thing, gay vampires all the way. Joking aside, this is a pretty good sequel. I didn't love it when I first watched it as a kid, but it's grown on me. I appreciate it more. It's not has like over-the-top monster movie vibe, but it is. If you're into like just these tragic monsters, Dracula's Daughter is a pretty tragic character. Like you kind of feel sad for her. And for some reason, I love that. I love just sad monsters. I mean, the Phantom of the Opera is hands down my favorite of all the Universal monsters, and just what a sad mess he is. Disfigured, disowned by his own mother, has to live beneath the Paris Opera House in these dark cellars. Kind of like getting on a tangent here. We're supposed to be talking about Dracula's Daughter. I'm talking about the Phantom of the Opera again. Okay, I'm just going to say Dracula's Daughter, pretty good, but for now, let's get to the final film of the 1930s, and that is Son of Frankenstein. This is the third Frankenstein movie and the final one to have Boris Karloff as the creature. With that said, his performance is downgraded from Bride of Frankenstein. He no longer has any dialogue. It's not really explained. I don't know, maybe he just doesn't have a lot to say. We all have those days. But that's okay, because that gives Bela Lugosi an opportunity to steal the show. You see, we're going to have to get into a little bit of history here. After Dracula, Universal thought Lugosi was going to be their next big monster guy. The previous one being Lon Chaney, who was like the star of the silent era, and unfortunately passed away from cancer. So Bela Lugosi sort of took over that. But then Lugosi didn't want to be the Frankenstein monster. He wasn't into that whole thing. He didn't want the makeup, and he wanted to be Dr. Frankenstein, which honestly he probably would have been good in that role, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted him to be the monster. So he declined. Karloff took over. Where was I? I went on a whole tangent here. Right, so Karloff became like the big horror star, and Lugosi was kind of left in the dust. His career kind of suffered a lot after that, which sucks because, I mean, I think he's a good actor. I think a lot of it is a result of him having a Hungarian accent, and I'll just say it, I think people were a little more racist back then, maybe. I think that may have affected his chance to get more roles, because if you don't want that rich, savory Hungarian accent in your movies, then you're just fucking moron, dude. I need all of that. So good. But yeah, he got to play Igor in Son of Frankenstein. Like I said before, Fritz is the Hunchback assistant. Igor is a different character who also claims to have worked with Dr. Frankenstein, but he could be lying for all we know. But what we do know is that Igor was a criminal who was hung. I believe it was for grave robbing. He was hung. So the idea is he was declared dead after being hung, And then he ended up not being dead. His neck was severely broken. So he's got this like bone kind of sticking out of his neck, and his shoulders kind of up in a weird way. So, you know, he's not a hunchback, but he is definitely a mess. He essentially wants to get revenge against the jurors that sentenced him to be hung, and he wants to use the Frankenstein monster to do that. So, kind of has like a bit of a slasher movie formula, but Igor is the main villain, and he's using the monster as his weapon to do the dirty work, I guess. And like I was saying, Lugosi really outshines Karloff here. He gives such a good performance as Igor. Like, it's so good. He's so creepy, and there's a vibe about him. It's just like, I just want to travel back in time and give him an Oscar for this shit, because it's so good. But I have no idea where you get Oscars from. I can probably buy them on Amazon, probably. But you also have a great performance from Basil Rathbone as the son of Dr. Frankenstein. I could talk about this movie for 8. This is another just really good one. I would say this is another good one to start with, but definitely Bride of Frankenstein you should start with first. But this one's really good. It just has good performances, good atmosphere, a pretty decent pacing. The Frankenstein franchise, unfortunately, declines a bit after this one. But yeah, okay, so that's the end of the 1930s, which was a decade that introduced most of the main Universal monsters. What a hit. Oh my god, this is running a little bit long, so I guess we're going to have to make it into a part 2. See you next week.